Okay, process question. Because of the snow, the PowerPoints that I left up were what I would have covered, which covered a large part of basic neurochemistry. You will be tested on that. It is something you have to know. So if you, sometimes, I guess there's no gentle way of saying this, so I'll just say it, okay? You have to take an active part in your education and not wait for me to just like display stuff, right? Just because it's not covered in lecture doesn't mean you're not responsible for it, because in the field, you're responsible for knowing this. That's actually how I got recruited into the field, because I was into the neuroscience, not so much into the 12-step stuff, being a normie. Science, black science nerd. So I'm into, okay, why does this drug do this to the brain, et cetera, and why, as you were saying before we got started, alcohol is gnarly. I don't know if you read the newspaper, but there was a piece about a woman who is in the field, right, recovering addict or alcoholic, facing an impending major surgery, one of the most painful surgeries that you can get, knee replacement. And she decided to drink 3 of those individual bottles of vodka that you get with a beer chaser and then drive. And she's a drug counselor in California. And she killed a dude, okay? Hit the dude. He's jammed into her windshield. Windshield is broken. She continues to drive. People get in front of her and stop, call 911. He's dead. She's probably facing 45 to life. So, word to the, alcohol is gnarly. But, okay, people can relapse, even professionals in the field. It's ironic that, right, you're an addictions counselor, which meant you had to go 5 years clean and sober before you could even get your license. And she had knowledge as well the consequences are, and you still decide to drink just you're freaked out about the pain that you're about to go through, and you kill somebody. Yeah. So what I was going to say is I can review that material. I mean, it's up on Moodle, etc. I can do that. Or we can just move on. And you can ask questions later if you have read through it, because I did do a sample with somebody who came into office hour. Did you read it? Well, no.
Can you go back to your list of your weekly stuff right before this and see what PowerPoint it is? Because I get confused about your PowerPoint. Some of them are duplicated and...
Some of them are. This one is the one that is referred to as supplemental and talks a lot about epigenetics, where that came from. And then we get into neurochemistry.
Taking P1 right now.
Huh?
Taking P1 right now. So.
Yeah.
I'm going to take that next time. And it's in week what?
Last week?
Okay.
Week 5. Okay. That's why it's called week 5 supplemental, week 5 day 2 supplemental, because it's everything that we would have covered plus a little extra.
Is what we're doing today going to be on the midterm?
Yeah.
What do you have? Okay.
Yeah. Yes, Linda.
Oh, I say I kind of liked it because I went on Moodle and I got it off what you're supposed to do today or whatever, and I kind of like it to get it first. That way I can go down and write whatever I want to do. When you're talking, I can have my own notes too. But darn, I got it this week and now you're not going to do it. No.
Well, again, we can if there's some, question about how it works. The basic piece, and what DSM covers, which I'll reiterate, but I'll give you an example, right? So You know, when Rasmussen talks about other addictions and what I call practitioner praxis, have I used the word praxis before? Okay, so praxis is an English word. So don't say speak English, because I am. And where praxis, not the Klingon moon. No trekkers here, huh? Okay, fine. Theory and practice. How they modify each other. Okay, so part of the innovation in the field, and remember the field's like younger than I am. I'm pushing 60. For a long time, it was dominated by 12-step culture, which meant with a 1939 sensibility, meant there's no science. It's just, okay, this is our community where we try to heal ourselves. One's a doctor, Dr. Bob and Bill W. One's a doctor, one's a stockbroker, but the doctor was addicted to alcohol, so obviously his medical training was not necessarily preventative. And as you will find in terms of your practice, addicts are not stupid. They may, in fact, the more intelligent you are, the harder it is to break an addiction because of what your mind and your intellect does to rationalize it. Oh, I got it under control. Yeah, Philip Seymour Hoffman. Sure. Yeah, you're a big millionaire movie star, and okay, you at least move out separately from your family, but you're still shooting yourself up with all this heroin, and then you got to supply Suboxone? Who does that? Right? So, for example, with DSM, so this was at the top of last week's supplement, right? 2 groups of substance-related disorders: substance use disorders, SUDs, and substance-induced disorders. So, substance use disorders are patterns of symptoms resulting from the use of a substance which the individual continues to take despite experiencing problems. Signal, no signal?
Signal that we got a message that your battery is weak, that I wasn't getting 5 minutes ago. So
Okay, all right,
I don't think it'll last through the whole thing.
okay. It'll cut out.
That looks really nice for my hair.
All right, it's hot. Hot on channel 23 or 9, whichever. All right, substance-induced disorders include intoxication, withdrawal, substance-induced mental disorders including psychosis, bipolar and related disorders, induced depressive disorders, substance-induced anxiety disorders, obsessive-compulsive and related disorders, etc. So, substance use disorders, substance-induced disorders. So knowing the difference between those two things will be on the midterm, naturally, and the final, because the final will be, first half of the final is the midterm. So, 11 different criteria. So when you see this referred to on the midterm, criteria and symptoms are the same thing. Right? Taking a substance in larger amounts or for longer than you meant to. Wanting to cut down or stop using the substance but not managing to. Spending a lot of time getting, using, or recovering from use of the substance. Cravings and urges to use the substance. Not managing to do what you should at work, home, or school, or obviously within a relationship. Family commitments because of substance use. Continuing to use even when it causes problems in relationships, giving up important social, occupational, or recreational activities because of substance use, or recreation around substance use. Using substances again and again, even when it puts you in danger. Continuing to use, even when you know you have a physical or psych problem that could have been caused by or made worse by the substance. Needing more of it to get the effect that you want. Tolerance and development of withdrawal symptoms which can be relieved by taking more of the substance. And that's assuming that the substance produces withdrawal symptoms, because not all of them do. So got an example of one that doesn't?
You said like acid?
Like acid, yep. And, pot is highly variable. So, yeah, there is a withdrawal syndrome. It's been described in the literature since the mid-'80s, early 80s, actually. But, well, you'll see with spice as an example, which I'm going to use. So, all right. And how you'll also be expected to know and be able to make the distinction between mild, moderate, and severe. And an early remission, which is basically just like borrowing the language from cancer. Less than a year is early remission. And sustained remission, which is more than a year. And as you know, depending on the substances like meth, right? So don't even talk to me until you have 3 years. Because you ain't out of the woods until then. Starting then. Which is partially why we don't allow you to get licensed as an addictions counselor until 5 years. If you had an addiction and if you're in recovery. For a variety of reasons. But and then on maintenance therapy, so whether that's methadone, Suboxone, end-of-use disulfiram, or a controlled environment, which could be jail, prison, or secure treatment. Mental institution. All right, I'm going to use an analogy because it'll be, I'm just giving you a heads up, just so you know it, is a device from memory. Spice is to marijuana what China White is to fentanyl.
What's fentanyl again?
Fentanyl is a synthetic opiate, 80 to 100 times more potent than morphine.
I have a sister that's paralyzed from her waist down. That she was just telling me the other day that she has a fentanyl patch.
Yes.
That she wears. Changed
Right.
in 3 days.
Yes.
Those are scary. Wow, because they can wait.
Yeah. Here's one of the challenges that somebody asked me, earlier today, actually, about are there any, I'm going to be going, post-surgery, there's going to be opiates. Is there any powerful painkillers that aren't opiates? Well, yeah. But, there's the but. There's trade-offs. So, I recommended one, but again, ask your post-op physician, because yes, you have a history with opiates. You can let them know that. But it's going to hurt. They're cutting on you. So, yeah, there's that danger of relapse. And that's always one of the unintended consequences of being an opiate addict, is that you're taking these drugs, which are the only things that we've found that are useful for actually stopping pain. They actually don't stop pain. You just induce a state that you don't care. The pain signal's still getting through. You just don't care, like you feel like you're shielded from it. And, unfortunately, nothing else works.
So if you go in for a surgery like that,
Yeah.
does your body tell you that, like say you're under and they give you some opiate to keep you from feeling the pain, and you wake up and you didn't even know, I mean, it's on your record, of course, but, you weren't specifically told that. Does your
Well-
body recognize that
Well,
drug? And-
what's more likely to happen is you'll still feel the pain because you're not they can't give you enough, and the amount needed to stop the pain might stop your breathing. That's always the trick with anesthesia and pain management. So, for example, you mentioned fentanyl patches, all right? So, 5 years ago in this class, a woman brought her partner in, who asked me about, okay, a tree fell on him. Now, normally he'd be dead, but a tree fell on him. And so, spinal reconstruction, pelvic reconstruction, broke every bone in his body. Therapeutically, he's given fentanyl patches with oxys for breakthrough pain. Yeah. Okay. And he's concerned because, look, I'm not an addict and this is prescribed. This doesn't actually handle the pain. They told me I'd never walk. He's walking in without a cane. So I'm in incredible pain, even with the fentanyl and the oxys. So they are handling some of it, but there's a point at which you adapt and it stops working, right? What should I do? Well, you live in this state, not in, like a medical marijuana state, because he asked about that. That's what specifically one. Thus, we live in this state where, it might be better for you to handle the pain if, an edible works better for you than fentanyl. Going cold turkey from brownies rather than fentanyl. Which would I rather you do? Which would you rather you do? Right, but you don't live in a state that supports that at the moment. And we haven't studied it, so I don't know what the therapeutic effect is. But I do know people who are doing medical marijuana edibles for their pain that find that they get better results than opiates. Science, we need to study it because that's anecdotal. And I've had enough people say it. So, for example, back to the slide, spice is to marijuana what China White is to fentanyl. The original China White was number 4 Asian heroin out of China, produced by the Red Army, exported through Thailand into the United States. Very high-grade, pure heroin. Very prized by users. The original China White. The French Connection China White. Yeah.
Can't you die from pure heroin?
Yeah, sure. And that reminds me of something that I was going to give you about underground economy dynamics, in case you didn't know, about cutting, stepping on, stuff like that. Do you like that stuff?
Yes.
All right. It's better done as a graphic, but generally speaking, yeah, it's very potent when it was pure. Usually a standard practice is to step on it, that is, dilute it, cut it with SWP, some white powder. Okay, now if the dealer wants you to do repeat business, that some white powder will be something like lactose or milk sugar, which is relatively, is harmless, right? But if it's cleanser or bleach or whatever, then they don't care. Or a hot shot, strychnine, whatever, they'll do that too if they figure that they're not going to see you again or they don't like you particularly, right? So from the top of the cut, from the producer to the street, there could be as many as 5 steps, 5 layers, each of which might step on it more, so that by the time you get to the street, the heroin or cocaine or whatever, some white powder that's there, could be like 10%. From like 80 or 90 to 100, pure, in those 5 steps, because everybody's stepping on it, right? So, China White, the original China White, was a very potent form of heroin that got stepped on very little depending on where you were in the cut process, where you were in the multi-level marketing. So here's what they do, and here's what happens in the underground economy. They substitute a cheaper drug. Fentanyl, it's cheap and easy to make if you have the right skills. 80 times strong, more potent than morphine. So you just cut that with a little bit of milk sugar, or you don't even have to cut it because it's cheap to make. So people shoot that, instant OD. Okay? So spice is to marijuana what China White is to fentanyl. So people were selling fentanyl as China White, people were ODing. Here's what's happening with spice, that idea, right? This is from NIDA. So spice refers to a wide variety of herbal mixtures that produce experiences similar to marijuana and that are marketed as safe, legal alternatives to that drug, sold under many names, including K2, fake weed, Yucatan fire, skunk, moon rocks, and others, and labeled not for human consumption. These products contain dried, shredded plant material and chemical additives that are responsible for their psychoactive or mind-altering effects. So, for example, K2 Summit, if you see that, so that's really high. K2 is the second highest peak on the planet, just below Everest. So, market really high, not for human consumption. Not for consumption, see, right on the label. And look at this. This is like, your grandma's house, potpourri,
What do you
right?
expect them to do with it?
Yeah, well.
Still something you can't use.
Yeah, I'm gonna buy it.
Yeah. All right. So labels on spice products often claim they contain natural psychoactive material taken from a variety of plants. Spice products do contain dried plant material, but chemical analyses show that their active ingredients are synthetic or designer cannabinoid compounds. So just like I was explaining a week or two ago, in the natural plant, in any natural plant that's grown in response to its environment, chemicals exist in a balance. Okay? You can synthesize out those chemicals and concentrate them. Hence cocaine. Hence heroin. Hence lots of things. Okay? When you concentrate them outside of the plant, you can produce drug effects that are more dramatic than smoking the plant for cheaper. And then you can sprinkle them on, that little potpourri, which normally you wouldn't smoke that, but wouldn't even consider smoking it, but some people do. So for several years, spice mixtures have been easy to purchase in head shops and gas stations and via the internet because the chemicals used in spice have a high potential for abuse and no medical benefit. DEA has designated 5 active chemicals most frequently found in spice as Schedule I controlled substances, making it illegal to sell, buy, or possess them. The manufacturers of spice products attempt to evade these legal restrictions by substituting different chemicals in the mixtures, while the DEA continues to monitor the situation and evaluate the need for updating the list of banned cannabinoids. So they are cannabinoids, but outside of THC, CBD, THC, etc., the ones that are classically known. So spice products are popular among young people. The illicit drugs most used by high school seniors are second only to marijuana. More popular among boys and girls. This came out, was posted in 2012, 2 years ago. So basically, easy access and the misperception that spice products are natural, therefore harmless, contributed to their popularity. And the selling point is the chemicals used are not detected in standard drug tests. So yeah, mind-altering effects, no drug tests. There's always a downside, right? So some spice products are sold as incense, but they more closely resemble potpourri, which basically like, if your grandma used it in the bathroom, or as a decoration, has a smell to it, but not as aggressive as, say, incense. It's abused mostly by smoking, sometimes mixed with marijuana as preparation as an herbal infusion for drinking. And people report experiences similar to those produced by marijuana: elevated mood, relaxation, altered perception. And in some cases, the effects are stronger than those of marijuana. Some people report psychotic effects like extreme anxiety, paranoia, and hallucinations. So there haven't been really any studies done on this. This is like the reason I talk about this in terms of the context of China White and fentanyl is this is just a new layer of the designer drug piece, the latest iteration. So we'll probably see more and more different ones. Stay tuned. All right, so despite the supplement, where the field started was with ingestive style addictions, that is, substances from outside of your body that you take into your body that either resemble chemicals that your brain or body make, and that engage your brain reward system. So, but it just starts with substances, as DSM-5 now acknowledges. So sometimes people or addicts will do things that don't make logical sense, but are an attempt to gain relief. So, really an irrational attempt to relieve what exactly? So, for example, crushing heparin, which is basically aspirin, salicylic acid, and snorting it, resulting in nosebleeds. People do that, right? So, just like last term, we were talking about, okay, what's an addictive behavior? Because people don't understand what an addictive behavior is. Well, there's reasons why drugs are formulated the way they are to ease their transition into the body. You don't smoke oxys, and they've reformulated oxys to not smoke them. Like they turn into a gel or whatever it is, right? But people will crush up aspirin and snort it. Now, we didn't talk about the chemistry of drugs, but basically blood is basic because it's seawater, and your mouth to your anus, the GI tract, is acid because it's designed to break stuff down, right? So salicylic acid in an acid environment is designed to break down quickly. So you take it orally, right? Cocaine hydrochloride, a base, heroin, a base, okay, is designed to be directed into the blood or in a blood-rich environment. Hence, people injecting, snorting, or smoking.
Because when you snort, does it go down, doesn't it go down your throat? Wouldn't that go down to your digestive tract?
Yeah, that's because of the unless you've taken A&P, like anatomy and physiology, right? So, when you snort something, it's designed to get into your lungs more, but because there's holes and cavities, there's a post-nasal drip, which means some of it drips down from your nasal passages into your mouth.
Okay.
Okay?
That doesn't drop down?
Yeah, and into your throat. But that route of administration is designed to get it into the lungs because the blood in the lungs is going directly to the brain. Okay? Which is why smoking crack is a bigger rush than shooting cocaine. Because even when you inject something, it's all over your body in 30 seconds. But smoking something gets it into your brain in less than 5. All right, so cutting, addictive tats, piercing, burning, self-injury as an addictive issue. All right, so self-injury, self-harm test. Do you deliberately cause physical harm to yourself to the extent of causing tissue damage, breaking the skin, bruising, leaving marks that last for more than an hour? Do you cause this harm to yourself as a way of dealing with unpleasant or overwhelming emotions, thoughts, or situations, including disassociation? Disassociation is a mental state that you go in when something really bad happens and you psychologically can't be the person that it's happening to, so you shut it away. It's happening to somebody else. It's actually a defense mechanism. If your self-harm is not compulsive, do you often think of self-injury, SI, even when you're relatively calm and not doing it at the moment? So cravings, urges. If yes to 1 and 2, you're a self-injurer. If yes to 3, you're most likely a repetitive self-injurer. The reason we ask this is because this is engaging the brain reward system, right? Self-injury causes an endorphin reaction, but doesn't resolve the root cause or the issue of which the behavior is a symptom. So why do people regularly overdose with alcohol and consider that normal behavior? Well, people will injure themselves, cut themselves when they are dealing with overwhelming feelings for a variety of reasons. Abuse, I've seen it with breakups, all kinds of different causative factors. And it's an addictive behavior. Right? So usually it isn't considered a problem like with alcohol, for example, until they kill themselves and not all people who engage in SI are suicidal, but many people who are suicidal have been cutters too.
Excuse me.
So yes, it is an addictive behavior. We do encounter it. It's the reason why it's physiologically addictive, right? So, abuse inflicted by others upon targets, and I prefer the term targets to victims. Because people can be targeted, right? You can harden a target, make it more difficult to reach, which is sometimes easier than making a victim less available to abuse. So people in relationship with addicts can experience or witness what the literature and practice are calling intimate partner violence. So domestic violence is when you live together in the same domicile, but intimate partner violence doesn't require that you live together. Okay? They don't have to live together. The relationship doesn't have to be sexual, just emotional. Intimacy meaning, okay, there's some kind of emotional bond there. Doesn't necessarily mean sexual. We deal with this a lot in the field too. So, like I said, the field has evolved way beyond just substance abuse. This is closely related. Okay, so without physical violence, a person can become addicted to being in a coercive power and control relationship, which becomes like a drug in terms of brain reward. You know, drunk with power, mad with power. Right? The adult target experiences pain, loss, and fear along with the addict, which are all caused by the addict. Any children in the environment also experience ongoing stress in terms of what the nervous system becomes adapted to, which might not be a big deal if the nervous systems evolved from survivors of genocide or slavery, but i.e. they're quote-unquote used to it, centuries of abuse, as we know from epigenetics, but that's no small thing either. Okay, so notice, of course, that doesn't make it right just because it's been happening for a long time.
So you're saying that because maybe they were genetically, their nervous system had a tolerance, right? That they don't even know that there's a problem until it's too late and they become an addict or whatever themselves? I mean,
Not necessarily not just an addict, but it
Right.
could be that if it's never been safe, they have nothing to compare the abuse to. Okay? So just like in that epigenetic study that I referred to in the first week, okay, they're talking about Dutch famine victims, right? So these were people who were under Nazi occupation. They were starved. Right? Now, the actual starvation only lasted as long as the war did, but they could track changes that are genetically tracked through, several generations. But what if you live in a culture where that kind of abuse has been going on for a long time and has been systematized? Like an Indian reservation. Like, certain ghettos. And I'm not talking about those with minorities. I'm talking about with, lower class, working class white people living in an impoverished environment. That could be like Marcola or wherever, right? So as an example, because this is real world, right? I ain't playing. It amazed me when I first got here because my experience, obviously, middle class, but we got to be middle class after working through, slavery and then 3 generations of sharecropping in the South before moving to the West Coast and basically, getting college educated and stuff like that. It was inconceivable to me that people wouldn't graduate high school. Like, wait, you can go to high school for free and you're choosing not to graduate? Yeah, because I don't need a high school education because my grandfather, my uncle, and my father all worked for Weyerhaeuser. And we didn't need, I'll just get a job. So you got multiple generations of people working in the woods. And okay, so what happens when Weyerhaeuser sends your job to Indonesia or Mexico? Because you think it's easier to pay you $20 an hour or an Indonesian $20 in a week? Which do you think they'll go for? You think which? Yeah, so that happened 3 generations ago. And so now you've been 3 generations as a meth cook. Yeah, so think that's some trauma? And how many people do I know like that here? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to say, you don't even have to go to Appalachia and coal mining country. You could be here. Is that a trauma? Yeah. How is that affecting people? Especially witnessing domestic violence or, emotional abuse, et cetera, et cetera. It's more common than you think. Right? Say again?
You gotta break the cycle some.
You do, right. So people have conceptualized a cycle, which is what I'm going to show you, right? So it doesn't make it, centuries of abuse or, multiple generations of abuse don't make it right, but it does make certain reactions predictable, right? So PTSD, different words for PSSD and multi-generational trauma. This came out of looking at domestic violence against women, the power and control wheel, the coercive control model. So while it presumes that you're in a certain family structure, which I'll characterize as nuclear, even though lots of people aren't in nuclear family situations, presumes heterosexual, and that's the model, but don't make that assumption. This can happen in a lot of different contexts. So power and control is the central issue and the central addictive process that goes on. We use intimidation and fear at 1 o'clock, emotional abuse, isolation, using the kids, blaming, denying, minimizing, micromanaging, economic abuse, using force and threats, and essentially removing liberty and controlling a person. Male or female can be the abuser or the target. So I don't like the V word, but there it is. Okay, so interwoven with physical and sexual violence or the threat of same. And so when you see any one of these 8 issues, you can basically find other things going on too. You're in basically a situation where intimate partner violence is occurring. So the family. So before the quote unquote traditional family, so got to ask the question, what tradition and whose tradition are we talking about? The quote-unquote traditional family has only been a tradition on this continent in the United States since the late 19th century. So I was speaking with some students from Africa earlier today and said, so you speak 6 languages. You can count your generations going back 6 to 7 generations. And that's normal for you. Speak multiple languages and be aware of multiple generations. I regularly encounter Americans who can't go past their grandparents and are monolingual English. And I said, yeah, America's strange. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're studying this, right? You're right, you're 200 years old, and how is it that you're not aware of what you were before you became American? Like, we're immigrants, we know we're African. But what that means to us is, yeah, we had civilization, have had civilization for a long time, and speaking multiple languages is normal for us, as well as being able to read in 3 or 4 languages too. Why is that so difficult for Americans? Well, part of that is this erasure that has happened, right? So people don't necessarily understand, okay? Before the traditional family, what we call the traditional family, that is what we call the nuclear family, right? Before that, the family was extended or tribal, and that was true in Europe as well as here. People lived with their parents, their grandparents, aunts, uncles, in an extended farming community, like a tribe or a village. And that had been the basic pattern for humankind, as you know, as depicted by anthropologists, for most of the evolution of our genome. Okay? The family, however you want to call it, used to transmit the values of the culture, who you were, right or wrong, what that is, do's or don'ts, what you will do or what you won't do. That was transmitted by the family, or whatever form of the family that you're talking about. Okay? The nuclear family, that is, biological parents and kids, only existed in times of war or trauma as the smallest survivable traveling unit. So it existed, but only after there was major disruption within the culture. So Ma and Pa and the kids could leave and travel somewhere else and set up shop somewhere else. All right? So that traditional family. what I saw growing up as depicted on television, and I believe everything I see on TV, just like everything I read on the internet. The traditional family, stay-at-home moms, working dads, dads working outside of the home, kids go to school after learning potty training, table manners, social manners, the ABCs, timetables, and then drug-taking behavior, usually alcohol and cigarettes. When they're of age, though, we've seen how that works. Kids sneaking cigarettes, Art Linkletter, you probably don't know who he was or whatever, but smoking corn silk behind the barn. Wait, corn silk? What? Right, well, if you've never seen corn growing, the stuff that comes off the top, you dry it, you smoke it. I know. I was like, me smoking my grandma's black tea with the rolling papers I got on H Street. Smoking Lipton. Because I saw this poster in the head shop, take some more T and C. Okay, so really? Banana papers? Smoke. Tried the banana peel thing too. Dried banana peels and smoke those. I was 11. What do you want?
Oh my god.
Okay? All that was done behind my parents' back. Right? As illicit drug-taking behavior. So, stay-at-home moms, working dad working outside the home. Basically, what we're calling the traditional family has only existed since the Industrial Revolution in this country. Because people usually worked on a farm or in a farm community. They had to move to cities where industrial jobs were, and that meant usually just dad working, mom staying at home. Today, we live in a different situation. More women in the workforce, birth control, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those things have changed. Domestic violence, all kinds of things have changed the structure of the family, right? So, parents stayed together forever, demonstrated that drug-taking behavior, conflict resolution, courting, the birds and the bees lecture, home economics, saving and spending, work ethic, etc. All these traditional family, go to church on Sunday or, the mosque or the synagogue or whatever it was, right? There was some religiosity. These all things were contributed as part of quote unquote traditional family values, the way they talk about that concept in Iowa or Texas. But, okay, so where is the family now, and who or what takes its place? So here's one of the challenges that we're finding in our field: people who have not been socialized by the family, or the family they got socialized from was their crime family, their using family, their work family, their whatever that particular thing was, right? So it's shaped by media, your using buddies, your drug friends, your group, your Facebook friends, those, whoever, people you have an electronic relationship with, your friends with benefits, whatever those are. Who shapes your attitudes? And where do they come from? So those of you who've been doing that personal addiction inventory that have spoken about, what it's like to not use your cell phone.
Not easy.
Yeah, not easy. And people feeling isolated and disconnected from their friends, like what happened to visiting people or,
And some people are far away too.
Yeah. Right.
I had people asking me if I was dead by the time I got back to my phone.
Right. Okay. So where do coping skills come from, and what are they? So the family used to be the place that imparted coping skills. As the family broke down, that task fell to the schools, which were not designed to do that. Because remember, in the original meme that I just showed you, it's the family that taught you your ABCs, timetables, table manners, potty training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you didn't get that stuff, you weren't ready for school. School was predicated on the assumption that you had all that stuff before you got to school and weren't being traumatized. So you showed up ready to learn. So if you don't get those, okay, so the coping skills. These are concepts, tools, identifiers, strategies, memes, if you will. So who gives them? How to use them? How do you test them? How do you refine them? These are questions I ask, not just to be rhetorical, but to say, look, coping skills help you cope. And hopefully you learn them before you're in the situation instead of the way the cat learned to swim. Assuming you threw the cat into the swimming pool. Boys can be cruel, I know. But cats actually do know how to swim. It's instinctual. But nobody likes to learn to swim that way. All right. Coping skills used to be modeled in the family based on what a child or family member would reasonably expect to encounter in daily life. So if things happen regularly to family members and they neither understood or understand or properly cope with things in an optimally healthy way, then you have things happen that are less than optimal. And it's often about what the family will talk about. So in my family, Black professionals working in predominantly white organizations who are psychologists, they study systems of oppression and they talk about it around the dinner table, particularly when their friends are all professionals like them working in these large systems. Okay, here's how we approach this from a scientific point of view. Here's what you have to do. Often use a lot of humor.
On a normal level, it don't happen like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Right.
parents don't always have those coping skills or know how to use them, much
Right.
less teach them to their children.
Right. Okay, so what I'm modeling here as a meme, right? What is your child going to reasonably encounter? That's predictable. Could be blunt. I'm the father of daughters, right? So it's not about meeting the guy at the door with a shotgun. That isn't going to happen. Right? What do moms teach their female children? Look, as soon as you get boobs, they want them. Okay? So all of a sudden there's something happening that you got to understand how to deal with your first kiss, as well as, beyond the plumbing lecture, strategies for avoiding unwanted sex, sexual assault, pregnancy, etc., etc. That's predictable, right? And sometimes you get that conversation. That conversation is best held by a woman, but what happens if you're raising your daughters?
Yeah, it gets passed over.
Yeah, it can get passed over just like the rest of the sex talk. Oh, we're Christian. We're saving ourselves till marriage. Right. That's why you're having oral sex and anal sex, right? Because sex is only vaginal intercourse. What is this, the Bible book? No. I mean, come on. Right? So you got to have the conversation. Yes, go ahead.
It's funny, in my human sexuality class last term, we watched a documentary about abstinence and how it pretty much doesn't work when you're forcing it upon children. And they showed a ceremony of a bunch of young girls getting their purity rings.
Right.
And they met up with them like a few months afterwards, and it turned out that a large percent of them were actually pregnant
Mm-hmm.
because they did end up having sex, but they didn't know like what to do in that situation, so they had unprotected sex.
Right.
And
Right.
happened. So it's no coincidence that you tell a child, no, don't do that, they probably do it. Like,
Yeah. I mean,
Give them the information, then not give them the information.
right.
They're gonna make their own decisions.
The data, the science shows skill building is better than prohibition. Even if it is uncomfortable, skill building is better than prohibition. So, addictive behaviors are modeled from within the family or imposed by the environment in the absence of protective skill building from the family, meaning they have to talk about it and build the skills from, for example, within. So some coping skills can come from within the person, even when they're not modeled in the environment. And this is part of what we call resilience in the literature, and I didn't bring the graphics that talk about that, but it essentially goes like this. So let's say you have a resilient child. There is a skill, and it's called adaptive distancing. It's like one of 4 core skills to build resiliency in the child. So resiliency means no matter what happens to you, you'll bounce back. No matter how bad it gets, you'll bounce back. So for example, this came out of, so we know that 1 out of every 4 children of alcoholics becomes an alcoholic. We know that 1 out of every 3 children born in poverty will replicate that poverty as adults. We know that 1 out of 9 children with mental illness in the home, this particular one was schizophrenia, develops schizophrenia. Okay? Now, so what we have done before is reduce the risk by focusing on the one, not noticing that, oh, most of the children of alcoholics don't become alcoholic, most of the kids in poverty don't become impoverished, and 9 of these kids, or 8 of the 9, don't develop mental illness. Well, how are they making it? What are we doing? Oh, it turns out we were doing nothing, but they seem to be making it anyway. What's causing them to make it? An inner quality that we can actually teach to and program people for. And one of those things is adaptive distancing, which basically simply says, I won't grow up like that. Like children have an innate sense of right and wrong. Their own inner moral compass that basically says, this is right even though well, the people around me are doing wrong. Where did that come from? Well, let's just say it's in the genome and comes out. We observe it often enough so that's predictable. Okay, well, let's enhance that.
it's also just kind of like vicarious, like
Yeah.
learning from their mistakes.
Yes, they can, as long as those mistakes aren't ultimately fatal. Okay, so adaptive distancing. I'm not going to grow up or be like this or that person. And there's other skills that go along with that. Daddy or mommy is sick. They have a disease that makes them act that way.
Is that what I'm on?
Yeah, yeah. So that's like a concept, a framework that, oh, why are they acting like that? Well, they have a disease, just like, when you had a fever and you saw all kinds of crazy things. That fever's coming from a bottle? Yes, honey, it is.
Sad.
That's the hardest part.
Well, I'm gonna go there because even though it's a hairy memory, it basically talks about, all right, in Indian country, prevention for us starts 6 months before birth. Okay? While baby's still in the womb, mom is already modeling certain behavior. It's in the culture, when it's healthy, right? So, when I first moved up here from LA, dealing went down to the 6th grade in '83. So first use is in kindergarten. Okay, so my career, the reason I date my time in this field for 40 years is because in '71 I'm dealing with folks, kids, that are witnessing domestic violence and are self-medicating with weed. But they're labeled emotionally disturbed. Well, yeah, you witnessed mom being beaten up by dad. You can connect the dots that it's alcohol. Are you gonna sit still in 3rd grade?
No.
Okay. So what are you gonna do? Well, there's weed in the neighborhood, let's smoke that and show up at my clinic or whatever, right? So you could understand if those are the conditions, first use is going down to kindergarten. Dealing is in the 6th grade. So I move up to Eugene in '84 and I'm noticing that Eugene's like 5 years behind LA. And then we have the age of initiation at 10, and that's a current number. So it's hovered around 10 for the 20 some odd years that I've been here. So that's an average. Some people begin at 5, some people go till 13. Reason I was going about that, okay, in terms of the environmental model and prevention. Where do you start to stop the problem? How young do you have to get? Well, some of us felt you should start in preschool, in Head Start. Okay, low-income kids. How do you do that, right? And so we developed a curriculum that came out of DC in a mostly black neighborhood that developed a prevention curriculum for Head Start. And that was 20 years old at the time that we started doing it in the early 90s. Right, so in the 70s. So acknowledging that reality that I talked about in LA. So if you're going to develop a curriculum to be delivered to preschool kids, then the teachers have to be trained and A&D competent. Understand how that works? And kids are not going to come up with a clinical diagnosis. Okay? Real world quote from Portland. When daddy uses the brown powder, it's okay. But when he uses the white powder, I have to run and hide. The child is describing the difference between dad using heroin and meth, where she gets sexually abused on meth, but not on heroin. So the kid talks in a story, right? Not clinical language. So you have to train the teacher to understand. What? Another real world quote. My uncle was on cops. Oh, your uncle's a cop? No, my uncle was on cops because they busted the crack house, and this is a 5-year-old. Okay, so this is a teacher who is a child of an alcoholic, unresolved until we talked about it in the training, who got one into education. Do we know that as a rule, many teachers, firemen, policemen, nurses are children of alcoholics? Yes, we know that. Do they bring their issues into the workplace and their blinders? Yes, they do. the reality, because those two examples I told you were Portland. Late 80s, early 90s. Okay, so this is real world. We're dealing with, okay, the need for prevention has to go to preschool. And if we're not doing that, what are the kids being raised to do? Yeah, we have that.
I was just gonna say that I was 23 years old before I realized why we weren't allowed to touch Daddy's AC/DC mirror that had a razor blade on it. But it just never clicked. But I mean,
Yeah.
we were little,
Yeah.
and it was out in the garage on the thing, you know. And
Yeah.
it just, like I said, I was 23, and I was like, oh,
Oh,
that's what he
right.
was doing.
Right. Okay?
Yeah.
So little kids observe stuff. They report it because they have not been told
That it's wrong.
that it's wrong. And they see what's in the environment. That's all. They report it. So our field has become one of the delivery modes of choice for coping skills with addictive behavior. Right? Sometimes the simplest coping skill is teaching a framework that gives them an understanding about what's going on and how to act before you're in the situation. Because the situation will come up again. It's predictable. So let's pretend, no, don't pretend that it ain't gonna happen, because it's gonna happen. If not, it's already happened. Okay, so public health environmental model, which I think I shared with you already, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, there's slides for it, but. Okay. So in terms of coping skills, just to break it down, the simplest, or also simplex, which is another word, the simplest generic science. You start with the individual, their behaviors, and their family systems or environment that creates the conditions that support the behavior. AC/DC mirror with a razor blade. Okay. All right. Okay. Get them to stop doing whatever the behavior is that's harmful, short term. So then in the axiochemical model, which I'll share with you later, not today, but it basically says, okay, drug use, addictions of all kinds, not just ingestive substance addictions, but other addictions occur in a cultural context. So you need to know what that cultural context is, and if there are protective factors within that culture, great, use those first, but if there aren't any, import some. And then you can start with generic science, if there aren't any. Okay, so after they've stopped, stay stopped. Where is this? I know where this is. Okay. Okay, after they stop, stay stopped, using healthier cultural responses. Let's see. I guess I'll fix that later. All right, so ingestive addiction. Ingest things you take in your body, also known as substance abuse, eating disorders, and socially promoted addictions. So, for example, one of the things that we see in the recovery center, alcohol, marijuana, heroin, methamphetamine. Sometimes meth goes to the head of the list, followed by heroin, then marijuana, then alcohol, but those are usually the major four. Then recovery support, cultural adjustment. Like sometimes that could be just the adjusting to the culture of higher education, tobacco, club drugs, spice, eating disorders, and overeating. So ingestive addictions. So when is it a problem? So for example, high performance users can be addicted without showing a drop in performance for a period of time. Then tolerance sets in. So you won't necessarily see the usual risk factors with some people. They're high performance drug users, meaning they can maintain a straight A average or whatever the measurement is, without necessarily falling apart initially, right? Others will show the usual sets of problems earlier. So for example, this is the old DSM-4, but what I used to say, okay, if you cannot use for 6 months and not care that you haven't used for 6 months, it probably isn't an addiction for you. But get to 6 months first. This was the pot model. Okay, because people, congratulated themselves after stopping for a week, which you haven't even detoxed yet. All right? So can't stop, loss of control once you start using, financial, social, and family problems, and usually in the workplace or the school is the last place to notice a drop in performance. So I'm going to skip this part because we're out of DSM for now. Remember this? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, all right, we can skip that too. But it will be an item on the midterm.
What?
I'll show you. Okay, LD 50. Okay, lethal dose for 50% of what you tested it on. Right? So there's a varying lethal dose for alcohol depending on who's ingesting it. Right? So 0.21, 100-pound middle school girl, 4 doses. 3 beers and a shot of vodka. Coded her. They brought her back, but she coded. 0.35. College, fraternity, male student, hazing, fraternity initiation hazing. 0.35 blood alcohol. Killed him. Naive adult is supposed to be 0.50. And naive meaning no tolerance. We can find people like that. If they exist. Theoretically, they must exist, but I haven't met them. All right, then process addictions. Things you do with your body which engage your addictive attention for the brain reward system. DSM basically is, acknowledging that this exists. So certain forms of religion are process addictions. Sure, I'm Jesus. That's why I need your wife and an arsenal. The aliens are coming. Kill yourselves to join them. Wear Nikes, etc. There's lots of examples like that. Okay, weaponized religions. The weaponized because they're toxic to non-believers and believers, or people lower in the hierarchy of the religion. The pedagogy, the things that they teach within those particular systems make you prone to self-hatred or hatred of others with certain immutable characteristics. We don't like those people. So poly addictions, many addictions, not addiction to plastic. Polypharmacy, take many drugs to achieve a combination effect. Polyprocess, engage in many types of process addictions, workaholism, internet addictions, internet relationships, gambling. Ingestive and process addictions together, this is what poly addictions refer to as well. Alcohol, gambling, cocaine and meth, workaholism. cross addictions originally applied to drugs within a drug class, which tolerance to one induces tolerance to all, cross tolerance, i.e. benzodiazepine, Valium, and Xanax with alcohol. They're cross tolerant because they're all sedative hypnotics. So tolerance to one is tolerance to all of them in that class. ADHD meds, for example, Ritalin, Silert to Adderall, methamphetamine. Certain ingestive addictions make you prone to process addictions and vice versa. So, for example, you can have clean and sober workaholics, clean and sober chronic debtors, sexaholics, relationship addicts, religious fanaticism, churches with suppressed sexual education and whose members practice adultery, child sexual abuse, improper boundaries. Okay? Addictive organizations. Thank you. 2 minutes. All right. So, certain organizations function as if they were an actively practicing addict. They produce addicts and codependents. So, you suspect any organization which sells addictive products or services, any organization built along government or corporate lines, any organization with a high percentage of codependents, active or recovering addicts. So, for example, government, military, police, fire, healthcare, education, religion. So any organization can be addictive. It's also true that not every addictive organization is addictive everywhere. So from the Addiction and Slavery Field Manual. A battle is lost or won is easily described, understood, and appreciated, but the moral growth of a great nation requires reflection as well as observation to appreciate it. A man's character always takes its hue more or less from the form and color of things about him. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have the exact measure of the injustice and wrong which will be imposed on them. It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. All right, so this will be up later tonight. And see you Thursday. You're getting the midterm Thursday.
Lane Online. Learn, unlearn, relearn.